Welcome to Lead into the Future today. I'm really delighted you could join us. I'm joined today by Dion Chang of Flux Trends and Nicole Sorrell of Lumina Learning. And both will be sharing their insights and some digital tools, and I'll be talking to you about building a culture of innovation. But before we get into that, I'd very much like for you to go over to slido.com and enter the event link, which is 78087, and answer the question that you find. And what we'll do is we'll get to the answers in a little bit and pick up on what you had to say. So let's start with Dion, who is the founder of Flux Trends and is a business and foresight strategist, a trends columnist, keynote speaker, business school lecturer, walking ideas bank, and professional cage rattler, in his own words. And just to give you a little bit of background, I first met Dion at an event when I heard him speak, along with his business partner, Bronwyn Williams. And I was so delighted to hear their approach and how they go about doing things. I absolutely had to meet them. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Dion's session and we'll go straight into it.
Well, there's so many terms now. So BC before Corona and AC after Corona. So this is BC stuff. What I'm going to do today is really just look at what companies were trying to adjust to before the pandemic hit, and what has been really fast-tracked very, very quickly now to do such. So I just wanted to share something. I love context. So whenever I speak, and I speak in a visual language, I like to share visually. This image just said it all. And I think this was even before complete lockdowns, because now you can't even have a gathering, masks or no masks. That person in the middle there must be feeling a little bit sheepish, because that's the only person without a mask on that. But really is, we have crossed into this new normal. And I think I've always said that if you hadn't lived through World War II, nobody has really understood what this is. It's one of the kind of the few collective experiences that we have as humanity on the planet, and it has really shaken us a lot. But let me take a few steps back. And what a lot of the work that I do with business colleges, with executives, was trying to adjust people to digitalization or digitization of businesses. And 2020 was always this benchmark year, and my heart sank somewhat whenever I go into a company and say, when they say to me they are going to get digital transformation by 2020. The fact that it started a decade ago matters not, but I said, there's plenty of buses leaving. But what I always like to frame is saying these are the things that were already on the radar and people were trying to grapple to understand them, and I'll contextualize them in subsequent slides for that. But from left to right, if you look on the screen, the first one is the sharing economy. If anybody's caught an Uber, stayed in Airbnb, we've understood that there's a thing called transient ownership. So we at Flux, we call that transient ownership. You don't need to actually own something to be able to use it or experience it. The middle one has really been fast-tracked now, which is the on-demand economy. So you're seeing deliveries, all of this kind of things. Customers want it seamless, they want it quick, they want it as easy as possible. The tech must be really easy to understand, and that's been accelerated. And then this sort of intangible image on the right-hand side was the growing gig economy. And we've seen a lot of things that have been pushed up with the pandemic about what do you do with gig workers. They're now suddenly a crucial part of this economy, the contactless economy, as I'm calling it. And how do we struggle with those workers' rights, deliveries, quick, fast turnarounds, supply chains that have completely changed before the pandemic hit and now will be completely altered as well. What we found before the pandemic was, and this is what companies were trying to grapple with, was a lot of business models pivoting. And so this was due to a lot of new technology. So what you're seeing on screen is a company like Panasonic. A lot of the Japanese companies, Toshiba, Sony, have started pivoting into completely unusual areas of their business. So Panasonic decided that their LED lighting was actually really, really effective in indoor farms, in vertical farms, And because of on-demand, people wanted things closer to them. You want your vegetables fresher, quicker, really literally pulled out the soil and then onto your table. So these were the pivots. Toyota said that they were going to go into personal robotics because they understand that by mid-century, car ownership will be an obsolete concept of the 20th century. And a massive company like Philips has pivoted completely into healthcare. So with all of these pivots comes the question of what skills does your company require? What does that do to change the organizational structure? And what does that do to the company culture? Because you move from very different things. And I found that a lot of companies are trying to, as such, put the toothpaste back in the tube. They want to start new processes, bring new tech into it, but they use the same teams, they use the same skills, and they expect different results. And of course, that doesn't happen. So now we have the great pause, and it gives us a chance of reflection. Well, for some that are baking banana bread and such, the others amongst us have been just working frantically to try and recalibrate everything we're seeing. But it is a really, really good opportunity for companies to actually sit back and think, well, what were we trying to do? Because something's been propelled. I just read something today that they said, the last 10 years of trying to digitize your business has been squeezed into 4 weeks. So a lot of companies are starting to look at that. So innovation, which was a nice to have, or on certain companies, is now a real necessity. You've got to think of how to do things differently. We've been forced to be remote workers. That's worked out good, bad, depending if you're parents and you have your children with you 24/7 while you're trying to work. But that also brings up a whole lot of things in terms of management, in terms of HR. Where do you go from here? And I always advocate to a lot of companies that we've seen the increase of questioning what is the purpose of your company. And I think this is a perfect time for companies to say, what do we really want to do? Because it's not only, we saw the rise before the pandemic hit of your ESG ratings, B Corporation listings, and it's not just companies trying to adapt, say, to climate change or new technology, but also trying to really recruit and retain new talent, and specifically younger talent, which I'll get to, and they're going to benchmark your company on very, very different values. And if your value systems don't match up, then they're not going to come and work with you. Because I say to retailers, if they're not going to buy your product because they don't believe in your value systems, then how the hell do you expect them to actually say, I'll come and work for you, if that value system is a big disconnect? So we already saw before the pandemic hit that new hybrid skills were needed. So there were interesting things. The city of New York was looking for a chief algorithmic officer, and that was a very specific role. It wasn't just to look at algorithms and see what they did for the city of New York, but that job was specifically to counteract bias within their algorithm so that the algorithm didn't have any racial, gender bias within that, or cultural bias, so that they could do that. So there's a lot of new things. And if we're going into this new world order, then companies are definitely going to have to look at very, very hybrid skills or different skills that they bring in, which they never thought they would have had to do. I always show people this slide, which just really confounds them, because especially if you're a parent out there, you'll say, my kids they're just so glued to their screens. But now we understand why, and this is very telling. So one of the biggest poaching activities that were happening in Silicon Valley over the past couple of years were casino slot machine designers who were being poached by tech companies to design their operating systems and apps. And if you look at the two, the facades or the faces of a slot machine and your smartphone and all your apps, you suddenly understand why, because the Silicon Valley business model is screen time and eyeball time. So your addiction to the screen is very, very cleverly engineered. And now you know why, because you were decided to become a slot machine designer, and suddenly you're working for one of the tech companies in Silicon Valley. So it's that kind of jumping into from different sectors that we need to be cognizant of, because it's going to happen even more once we get back to work and try and see what it is. I always say that this was the biggest lie that was fed to us all, that this was the path to eternal happiness, that you would go to school, you would go to varsity, you'd find a career, and then if you were a little bit ambitious or a little bit bored, you would change your job maybe 2 or 3 times in your lifetime, and then you would retire and then go off to wherever one goes off to after retirement village. But this is really what is happening in our world. And my niece in New York is my personal case study. She's in her early 30s, but within the last 10 years, she's upskilled herself 3 times already in very, very different skills and in very, very different areas. And she's a dedicated gig worker. She will not sell her soul to a company. They always ask her for a permanent contract, and she says, you can up my hourly rate, but I'm not going to come and work for you for full time. And I think this is a lesson we all need to do, specifically in a very, very changed world order. And now these guys are very, very proficient at that. And when you are starting to hire, especially a younger generation, so at Flux, we've focused on Gen Z, your teenagers and your adolescents. The oldest ones are now your newest customer, and they are also your entry-level workforce. And if you look at just what I put on the slide there, these are your new whistleblowers. Their social justice barometer is out the roof, and they will call you out on things. So it's a very different dynamic in terms of a workforce, in terms of values and purpose and what your company offers them. And they, of all people, know that you don't have a career trajectory, you have a career portfolio. And anybody who's in HR that's listening in on this session, will sort of maybe take a step back and say, but if we help them juggle a career portfolio, then we're going to lose that talent. And unfortunately, that is the reality of modern businesses. It's a very, very fluid workforce, and there is always going to be a side hustle. So your Gen Zs are going to keep on doing that. And I think we need to learn those lessons as well. So I say when we're coaching executives is, if you think about athletes, they spend 95%, 99% of their time in a learning zone. They train, they train, they train. And when that one athletic meet or the match is, they go into a performance zone. We spend 95% of the time in operations and in a performance zone, and then we go for a seminar for 3 days, and then we expect this miracle to happen, that we've got these new skills to do that. So we've got to switch that, and now is exactly the time to do this. And we've all heard those words, failing fast, all of those kind of things, but I think we need to rethink and reimagine what failing fast really is. And so I ask, in terms of company culture, do you have a speak up culture? Do young people have a voice and are able to challenge senior management? Do you have maybe holacracy, self-governing divisions, so you don't have silos, you don't have hierarchies? All of those things need to come through. And just to end off, that's kind of what we do at Flux, is we have a different sort of self-isolation. We lock executives in the room, and we interrogate all of these things. And I think they're important questions to ask, not only for a business that's going forward, but especially now when force has been really, really pushed upon us. And that's a really quick summary of what I've got, Louise. Thanks very much for that.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Dion. Let me see if you wouldn't mind unsharing.
Let me stop sharing. Great. There we go.
Thanks, Dion. I believe Nicole's having some problems with a laptop crash. So what I'd like to do, I see that there is a question already in Q&A for you. And perhaps if we can just bounce that right back to you. So the question from Ligita is for Dion, please. While we're trying to squeeze digital transformation to 4 weeks, are we seeing a similar turn in labor practices? To what extent is there a relationship between results orientation and digital transformation, trying to rapidly move into a higher trust-based results-oriented style of working, less about face time and more about results produced at a time the employee is most productive?
Yeah, I think, yeah, the short and brutal answer is, I think that chasm is going to actually grow, because even before the pandemic struck, you just saw, and that was the kind of the daily grind that I would experience in different companies, is that you would go in there and there was just this real disconnect. And if you saw, when I mentioned especially gig workers, what are gig workers' rights, that was kind of not really on the radar for mainstream businesses. And I think that big disconnect is for a short while, going to really be a very deep one, until people start bridging. And the only thing that I can hope for is that, because this has been such an accelerated pace of change, that things will be forced and will be pushed. You've seen remarkable things being done around the world in a very, very short space of time, whereas before it would have not been possible, or in inverted commas, not possible. And now suddenly it is possible. And I think we're going to have to do that. And I think it depends on your sector, and I think it depends on what voices or connections you have with policymakers, with government, with departments of labor, all of those kind of things, to be able to take it beyond the C-suite and then really into policy that changes HR or any kind of labor law.
Okay, fantastic, Dion. So what I'm going to do is just take a little segue from there. We'll come back to further questions for Dion after the next two little slots, and I'm going to share my screen again. We asked a question as we came on board on Slido. I'm not sure if everybody got the link, but I'm going to share the answers before we get going any further. So bear with me. I think I need to take a course in seamless virtual sharing or something along those lines. So the question was, how do you feel about living in our new virtual world? And if you haven't yet popped your answer into slido.com, just enter the event number 78087, please do so. I see you've got 32 responses, so if you'd like to add yours to that, we'll see how that goes as we go along. Pretty upbeat, so what excited, opportunities, virtual possibilities, enjoy, challenging, comfortable, challenged, and let's see what else we've got living on the sidelines there. Necessity, scary, okay, overwhelmed, scared. Yeah, so I think that without a doubt it gives us some sense of how everybody's feeling at the moment. I know that from running this question a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we had slightly different response. Okay, so one of the reasons why I wanted to invite Nicole is that I met Nicole in 2018, and I'd been looking for a suite of assessment tools for a long time, and really just didn't find anything that was innovative of this world, the language of today, the business language of today. And when Nicole approached me at the end of 2018, I realized that I'd found it. Nicole is the Global Director for Lumina Learning. She's an organizational psychologist. She's co-founder of the Growth Project, which is a project to do with charity, where charity and leaders come together. She is a designer of learning and development solutions, and her motto is waking people up to live a life of purpose, accountability, and kindness. Nicole, can you hear me? Are you on Zoom? Not yet, no. Yeah, you are. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, apparently.
Louise, if you want me to, I see a nice question from Yolanda about career portfolio. So, Yolanda, I get a lot of questions specifically from Gen Z parents. It's like, what must our child study now? They're going through to that. So a couple of things before I get into a career portfolio. Is firstly, for any of the parents out there, is really don't try and push your kids into an academic degree if they're not really ready for it or not sure what they want to do. History is littered with parents pulling their hair out. Because after 4 years, when your child actually turns 21 or 22, is when physiologically the brain settles into adult thinking. And here we are when kids are at 16 or 17 or 18 saying, you've got to decide what you want to do for the rest of your life. that in itself is not the right way of doing things. So what I advocate is to do internships, to travel, to dip your toe into a lot of different things. So to answer your question on career portfolio is also just to have that mindset. So if that young learner is going to go into a university, it is is that academic trajectory really suited for them, because there's a lot of short courses that people can do. And I think the question about how we enter into tertiary education is that is the be all and end all, and that's what we're going to do for the rest of it. And if I go back to that slide about reskilling and upskilling yourself, is to keep an open mind, saying this is probably not what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, or this is not the sector that I'm going to stay in for the rest of my life, and things are going to change, whether it's in 5 years or whether it's in 10 years. And it's to try and really prepare young people for that kind of agility. We talk about agility in business all the time, but that is required within those Gen Zs, and especially for teenagers, if they're going to go into matric passing in 2021, it means that they are fully squared into that Gen Z generation, and they are always going to have a side hustle. They are going to be entrepreneurial, they're going to want to do things, and they are not going to sell their souls to stay in a corporation for 25 to 30 years and then get a pension and then leave. Those days are long, long, long gone. So it's also, as parents, to get into that very, very fluid mode of thinking, what is that career portfolio for young? I hope that answers that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dion. And it seems we've got Nicole back, and you can see a huge grin on my face. It's a bit of frantic fiddling around. I'm glad you're back. I've got your deck in front of me. I think probably it'll need to be pared down because I don't think it was your final deck, but you'll just have
That's fine.
Through,
I'll go through what you have. Thank you.
Yeah.
And hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Dion, that was fascinating.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Dion. It's a great pleasure to be sharing this platform with you and to spend a few minutes just taking through high level some of the value of Lumina learning in the current virtual world. We focus on growth at the individual, team and organizational levels through our various digital solutions. Our key tool is the Lumina Spark Portrait, which looks at the individual and answers that question of who am I. We use a digital coach so that we enable autonomous coaching and also support for individual coaches around a process. We have a splash app, which is very engaging, so it takes the depth of the Lumina Spark Portrait and puts it into the palm of the hand so that people can use that quite powerfully to support conversations virtually. And then we raise the level to the team level, and we look at team connectivity, and we use a team viewer where you can see how the team are placed and where they shift. And we have a range of different dynamic virtual solutions, from the personal mastery, teamed connectivity, resilience, just to name a few. A lot around leadership, especially looking at the new type of leader that's required in this virtual world. So we are in 60 countries, translated into various languages. So it's very easy for the crossover. We integrate academic research with digital technology. And the key area for us is about our customization. We really put the client right in the middle. So what we recognize is, even though we have lots of solutions and virtual solutions, it's always about listening to the individual, to the client. What are their needs? What do they want? So we make everything customizable. Even as a practitioner, it has your logo on. You can even adapt the portraits, put in your own pages, pull in pages from our workbook. So you have your story that unfolds as you coach and support individuals, teams, and organizations. So why it works? Well, for me, a major difference, I've had lots of experience over the last 30 years in different psychometrics and assessment tools and companies that I've developed and run. But where Lumina Learning is different is that we look at 3 unique personas: your underlying, your everyday, and your overextended. And we don't make any assumptions that one everyday way of being leads to another. So if you're more logical, you're going to become more argumentative. That may not be the case. You could be highly logical with high EQ. And when you overextend, you may become something completely different. You may become withdrawn or too passive, but you're not necessarily just more of your strengths. And so looking and measuring the 3 unique persona gives us all this beautiful nuance, so we really access the complexity and the movement of personality. So as well as measuring the 3 levels, we also measure both ends. So you may be both and, you could be highly conceptual and practical, not 80% conceptual, therefore 20% practical. You could be logical and empathetic, or neither of either, but it's important to measure so that you're getting accurate feedback around how you're operating, what's working, what isn't, where do you need to shift. And that takes away the issue of labeling and stereotyping. Our theories are based on the big 5. That's how we developed our model, and then we integrate it across with Jung. And we provide that simplicity at 4 colors, but then the real depth at this 24 qualities at 3 personas. So we're actually measuring 72 constructs. Spoken about the customization. We have gift portraits because we want people not just to have effectiveness in the workplace, but to take it home. So we give a complimentary portraits to their partners. And really by integrating this e-learning and technology, we've been doing this for a long time, but now we are really speeding up our time to take this to market in terms of our broader solutions, because we know the need is now. And we have some wonderful processes, I think, just to share that can really help people. We also use colourful and practical language so that it's sticky and usable. And that's why the visual part of it, people can see things and then suddenly things are clear. Okay, I get it, and I can own it, and I can be accountable. So it's very powerful. So just looking at the Spark level, so we have various solutions. We have Spark, we have Leader, we have Sales, we have Lumina Motion for EQ. But at the Spark level, answering the question of who am I, it's a 45-page portrait, and it would take you on a journey, 4 colors, 8 aspects, 24 qualities at 3 persona levels. So measuring the 3 personas, I've mentioned this a few times. The underlying is your natural being, your natural preference. Every day, more your adaptive self. How do I need to be to survive and succeed in my workplace? And then overextended, it just gets too much. It's like tantrum, reaction, bang. This crisis is just overwhelming. It's too much for me. I'm not coping. And all the beast side of ourselves come forth. And it's understanding the impacts of that. And once we look at the consequence, we can then go into, we call it the journey of composure, where you actually regain your composure through breath, through understanding your strengths, seeing what you need to call upon, because everything you need is within yourself, but then you can get back to that centered level. So if you think about the brain and prefrontal cortex, it's about coming back in place so that we are operating from our conscious selves. And we use this portrait around what do I want to dial up, dial down. It's a bit like biofeedback to see I need more of this, less of that. I mentioned to you the Splash app. This is my favorite. It's on your cell phone. Scan your own QR code. You can scan your teams virtually, compare and contrast. This is what we're good at together. This is where I'm challenged by working with you. I need you to dial this up, dial this down. So it's a wonderful way of having really engaging conversations at, from a distance, but, it leads to people feeling safe, therefore they can share authentically and quite dynamically. And we take this also to a whole team level. It's amazing how people recognize their own splashes in each other and look at the impact of that. So in terms of raising it from individual level to team level, I'm going to just quickly show you an example. So this one happens to be my family in lockdown. I thought, well, what else are we going to do? Let's have a look at our Spark portraits. So this is me at the top, my family, my husband, and you can see me and my daughter happily up there in terms of inspiration driven. So if I look at the underlying, this is who we naturally are. Go with the flow, flexible, adaptable. Rest of my family, more discipline driven. It's about getting the job done well. But let's see what happens every day. If you look at mine over here, see where I go particularly, because everyone else kind of moves more slightly, but I go right across the mandala from inspiration driven right to outcome focus. So, okay, got to get the job done. And this big circle is the aggregate of all of us. And then overextended, what happens? So the family go even deeper to discipline driven. They may become quite rigid focused on that goal. I join back with Aura. I return to my natural happy place, but this time in an overextended way. So instead of just being flexible and adaptable, I become much more chaotic and kind of on overdrive and a bit unfocused. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of the team viewer. All our tools are quite dynamic and moving. That's why it's hard to give the true sense just in a flat presentation. But what we do actually is we look at what's the team strategy, what are your key critical behaviors to achieve your goals. We map them on the mandala. Then you look at the team wheel to see where are your natural strengths, what are the gaps, what do we need to do. See this huge void space. You know, if this is how they're being at the 3 levels, how they're going to be innovative, collaborative, and client-centric if this is their key. And of course, we can be all things. We just need the direction, the focus, and the intention, and then we can create a shift. The digital coach is another one of my favorites. I don't want to show you this as flat, so I'm going to just show you this briefly. So this is a digital spark coach where people can do this on their own, or this is actually a guide for coaches. What's your key issue? Let's look at your qualities around that key issue. I can look at key patterns to help me understand it. What are the key patterns? Just a quick overview of those. Amplifications, for example, if I want to press that just shows me the top 5. I can change the intensity. If I click on conceptual, gives me the definition, a video which will explain it, key coaching questions, and then it puts all of this. From there, it would then go into kind of developmental ideas, which just pulled out the portrait, or you can customize and write your own. And then you go into your grow as a goal model, and then finally you set your own personal goals. So it's quite a nice, concise way of focusing development, and it can be ongoing because you can keep looking at it at different stages. Lumina Select, I've just done one pager here. It includes an applicant tracking system for collective selection, but also a job profiler. So I put in there, what's the ideal leader in lockdown? What are some of these key competencies that are critical? So for example, if I take adapting to change, it shows me the key strengths and what the potential blockers are. So I've got strengths there, blockers are low, so that's okay. But let's have a look at the rest. So you click on each one of these and it's quite a dynamic tool. Just for time, I'm not going to pull that up right now. And then just case studies. So we've worked with across the board many Fortune 500 companies. Adidas, just a great case study here, looking at the employee index. They were the worst in their company globally, and having worked with us for 18 months, they were the highest with all the prizes. And they say that was down to our work. They did use very much a range of our solutions, from Spark, Lumina Leader 360, Lumina Emotion, where they looked at the EQ, but they shifted at a deep, meaningful level to really go beyond themselves, drop judgments, and see the value outside of finance into the more marketing and sales, yellow and red qualities that were more prevalent. And it was a very fascinating journey and very, very rewarding at many levels, seeing how it shifted not just their behavior in their workplace, but also their behavior at home, which is those relationships that I'm particularly passionate about because I'm married to my psychological opposite, so very important. So just to finish off in terms of inspiration, what drives us, I'm going to share the Viktor Frankl quote with you. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So the big opportunity here is by recognizing that there's a space, and we can move from unconscious reaction, where we are naturally triggered, to a conscious response. Responsibility, ability to respond, is the opportunity of life, of breath, of creativity, of connection, of relationships. And so that's what our work's about. How to support people understanding themselves, understanding others, knowing their triggers, knowing how they're filling that space, and providing other choices and opportunities to fill that space in a way that serves them and serve others more effectively. So thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to be part of this conversation. And if you're interested in knowing more, then I'm sure you'll be in touch. Back and over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Nicole. Just a little conscious of time, but thank you for sharing that. And yeah, what I will be doing is once we're through with this, I'll be sending through a recording to everybody, and also links to find out more about each of these digital solutions connected to what everyone's had to say. And last but not least, I'd like to share a little around innovation, about developing a culture of innovation, because I think that these are kind of the burning questions of our times, as both you and Dion have highlighted. Okay, so a big question, and I'm going to try and keep it to 5 minutes. Big question, and Marina Gorbis at the Institute of the Future, Palo Alto, just summarized very clearly for us where we're at. Phase 1, which is what we've all been experiencing since this crisis started, reveal and react, crisis management. Our myths and truths are falling away. The very vulnerabilities in our operating systems are being revealed to us, and that's across everything that we know. Phase 2, reassess, reevaluate, reset. What does it all mean? How did we get here? Who or what is responsible for this crisis? Why did this all happen? And then phase 3, reinvention. What can we do from today to prepare for or prevent this from happening again? And for all intents and purposes, what we're hearing at the moment is that future pandemics are very likely. We have the ideal ingredients for a perfect storm. So just having a quick look at the question, why? Climate change, population growth, global mobility, and the fact that we're all interconnected and connected gives us that perfect environment for this type of thing to happen. Could we have predicted it would be a virus? No, but we knew that something had to give. And the other thing that's contributing to this is our short-term reward and incentive systems, right across learning, education, health, business, economic, society, and the environment. And I think it's something worth considering when we look at what we want it to be. And this really brings us to those questions. What kind of future do we want to live in? How can we all get involved to build it? Which part of normal do we want to keep? And what type of new normal do we want to create? And what's our capacity to start doing this today? And I've had a couple of people say, well, you know, can't wait till we get back to normal. And actually, I don't know if I want normal back again. It doesn't necessarily make me feel better about what's going on at the moment, but we have a chance, we have an opportunity to create something different. So big question is really, what can we do today that'll serve us going forward? Where is our locus of control? What do we have control over? There's some things we can do straight away. We can build personal, team, and organizational capabilities around resilience, agility, creativity, innovation. And tied to that, create incentives and rewards for long-term thinking and action. It's what we need in the long term. And change our patterns of behavior. And as we know, if you've ever done anything that's around trying to change your patterns of behavior, that isn't always the easiest thing. And I think that the glimpse of the tools that we've had from Nicole and Lumina really illustrate the kind of clarity we can gain and insight that we can gain through measuring our different qualities and our personas. So, but first we've got to start with identifying where these capabilities actually live within our teams and our organizations. And towards the end of last year, the Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Sciences, KFAS, approached Lumina, and they said, with this amazing array of tools and real insight and depth that you can bring to the party, can you design something for us around innovation? And Lumina took up the challenge with a bunch of bright minds, and they created a program called Sparking Up Your Innovation. But one of the first questions that they asked was, what is creativity? What is innovation? And what is the difference? I think a lot of people think of innovation as something a gene that we're born with. And yet what they discovered is that innovation is really a byproduct of another process, or a bunch of different processes. So great ideas put into action and tried and broken and reiterated and what have you. And when we land up with something we can take to market, or something that actually changes things for the better in whatever way we're looking for. That the result of that is the innovation. So I was going to dip into another Slido, but I think I'll leave that for the time being. We don't have a great deal of time, and I'm very conscious of the fact that I've got about 60 seconds. So I'll slow it down. If you need to get off this call, I fully appreciate it. But if you want to stick with me, please do. As I said, we will be recording, so we'll send everything through to you. So the model that Lumina came up with was an 8-part model in terms of what does innovation actually look like. And we know that we need to experiment, A/B test, communicate openly, move fast and break things, iterate continuously, limit the downsides, listen to stakeholder feedback, and learn to love failure. And we hear all of this stuff all of the time in connection to innovation. But when we overlay it onto the Lumina modalities, and we actually look at, well, what qualities do we need? Who do we need to be doing these things? Well, we need big picture thinking. We need to be inspiration-driven, extroverted, outcome-focused, discipline-driven, down-to-earth, introverted, and people-focused. We need a combination of these things to eventually arrive at an innovation. And of course, the next question is, which of these qualities do you have that help or hinder your ability to innovate? And what qualities does your organization, your team have or lack? And how can we actually find out where these qualities live, where these people live? And as you saw with Nicole's flashlight into how we measure personality, you probably saw the splash that came up, which actually shows us where our strengths are, or in fact, where our overextensions are. And what I've done is I've overlaid a splash onto this model, and we can see from this person that probably one of the areas that they're not so brilliant at is the people-focused side of things, being able to take people with them, and perhaps around the observing, the measured, and the intimate. And really what that would tell me is that if I was this person, I would need other people to collaborate who had those strengths, perhaps somebody who was a bit more discipline-driven as well. And then when we look at the team view that Nicole showed you, we can see that if this team were perhaps directing the strategy around innovation, they'd be sorely lacking around the big picture thinking and the inspiration, the conceptual, the imaginative, the radical, that really drives those original ideas before we get to implementation. And we would need to balance this team with people who brought something else to the table. So for me, certainly with the kind of work that I do around leadership, there's some key questions and some key observations that are happening right now. And I think what we're doing is we're moving from leaders providing the answers to needing to be thought partners to people in their businesses, and often with all of their stakeholders. And probably the one key thing is that we're only as resilient as the most vulnerable person around us. And that couldn't have been more obvious to us than, that this coronavirus has brought to our attention. So as I said, you'll receive an email with a recording of the session and links to purchase. I know that Flux has a new trends report out and perhaps a portrait for yourself, but we'll explore all of that later. But a big thanks to Claire Lockey from Pinion Search Partners, who has been an amazing collaborator on getting this together. And I'm going to come out of that and move over to Q&A. So, Claire, do we have any questions for everyone?
Hi, Louise. I've just shared it on the Zoom group chat. Are you able to read it? I've just posted it just a few moments ago.
Well,
yes, I can see the questions.
Just exactly who's posted and to whom the questions are addressed.
All right, so from Shireen Balikara to Dion. Can you see that, Dion?
Yes, okay, so yes, I understand that some industries are much more prone to digitization, but I think the one thing that I've been very wary or worried about is that people, the big thing was everyone said, well, everyone's going to lose their jobs because of digitization or automation or some kind of robotics that would come through. And that is happening at a fast pace. And I agree, with Shireen, that there are some industries that are more prone to that or not. But there's still elements within those things. So, for example, construction, you're going to be able to digitize the design process. There's certain parts of that value chain within that sector that is going to be digitized. My biggest worry overall is that we talk about the displacement economy as a parallel to mechanization or just getting much more things automated. And if you look at, for example, the mining sector in South Africa, we've got this huge problem awaiting us, is that it makes no sense to not automate those mines, to send robotics 2 kilometers underground instead of sending human beings. But when you talk about displacement, those displaced workers need to have some technological skills. So it's the whole upskilling process of, are we upskilling people enough and fast enough to be able to do this? I just want to do a double one, because Ingrid was sort of saying, do you think there's more of a spiritual awakening? And I think with this pandemic, what you were saying, Louise, is that I think what we need to do, especially in terms of HR and looking after the human capital and people within an organization, is that it's not just, okay, well, do we go back to a new normal, or do we, are we all remote workers? We mustn't forget that everybody within this 6, 8, Lord knows how long lockdown period is, that we've all experienced in some way some existential crisis within ourselves. We started to question things, not only on a work level, but on a personal level. Spending more time with people, reaching out, whether it's virtual, all those kind of things. So, my parting shot, I'll answer some more questions, but my parting shot is my favorite quote for the day, which mirrors what you were saying, Louise, from Arundhati Roy, was the pandemic is a portal, and we can walk through it with our old, dead ideas, or we can walk lightly and ready to imagine another world. So I invite everybody to walk lightly and just kind of reimagine everything, and just know that everything has changed, not only on a business level, but also on a personal level too.
Thank you, Dion. And Nicole, I see a couple of questions for you there. I'm not sure if you can pick them up.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, maybe building on from Dion's point there, I think the questions were around, is Lumina, what happens with the kind of accessing the diversity of people kind of moving maybe in the moment, and also kind of too much of a focus on analysis versus people's natural ability of accessing their own intuition. And I think that very much, our work is around trying to get people to drop judgments and to access that ability to be able to read the other. So it's really, very much around understanding myself, only so that I can see that the world is not just in relation to how I see it, but, there's 8 billion people. We are all uniquely different. But if we can understand that there's, a commonality around people's personality that we can access and hook into through conversation, that leads to the opportunity for real listening. So all of our work is based on or inspired by Viktor Frankl, and I'll just share his quote because it will give you an essence of how we work with these tools, which are very much just a moment to impact the much broader process. So what Viktor Frankl says, and many of you will be aware of it, is between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. So what we're saying is, in order to know that there's a space to be accessed, you need to, first of all, you need to have self-awareness. You need to understand who you are, what your triggers are, how you activate or unconsciously react to situations. And then from that place, through understanding self, understanding others, managing your emotions, you're then able to take meaningful action. You're then able to choose a way of operating in that space that's going to lead to a much more higher leveled response, whether your response is silence and listening, or whether it's reaching out, but not just coming from a reactive base due to your own personality or being triggered by your values, but really being present in that moment to see right now, can I connect with the essence of this person? Can I go beyond the language and the tone of what they're saying and really hook into their need right now? Am I fully listening and understanding where they're coming from and then coming from them to me? So absolutely using intuition and that ability is the core. And these tools are a way of amplifying our self-awareness so that we become the driver of our, I suppose, of our success, our potential, of our behavior. You know, that we're not reactive. But if I know my natural, my everyday, my overextended, then I can see, well, what's working right now? Can I congratulate and applaud myself, celebrate my successes and strengths, but also where potentially am I being derailed? What am I bringing to this dynamic in this relationship or in my workspace? And therefore I become accountable, not just for my behavior and actions, but for my thinking, for my feelings, and then for my relationships and results. So I hope that answers more about the perspective of where we're coming from.
Thanks, Nicole. And I'm very aware that my slides weren't shared, and what I will do is make sure that on the recording of this that I include those slides so that you have a visual of what I was talking about. I see one question from Ingrid with regards to a trend towards spiritual awareness, and having heard Dion's response to that and Nicole's, very much so, Ingrid. Without a doubt, I think those questions about, you know, why did this happen? How could this have happened? Where are we? Where do we want to be? What kind of future do we want? What do we want life to look like? And, you know, there is a vision of a life that we do want. And it isn't necessarily tied to where it was. Saying that, I think without a doubt, we're all very aware that there is a long way to go. And what I'm finding, certainly with the leaders that I'm working with and the teams and friends and colleagues and family, is that there is an idea of, it's time to take stock. It's time to work out what we want it to look like. And, you know, even if we weren't willing participants in perhaps a spiritual makeover, I almost think we don't have a choice. It's one of those extraordinary times. And I just keep, I don't know about you, but I just keep feeling that, gosh, to be alive and around during a time like this, the big question for me is, who will I have been during this time? And that is very much at the forefront of my consciousness. And yeah, something that I'm very much keeping in mind. Really conscious of the time. Thank you all for staying with me for so long, for staying with us for so long. It's really been delightful to have you here. And as I mentioned before, we'll certainly be sharing a link and a recording and access to all of the people who shared today. And any other questions or queries, feel free to mail them through to me, and hopefully we'll be having some more of these in a slightly more seamless fashion. Fingers crossed. But thank you once again, and I'm going to end the meeting here. Thank you, Dion. Thank you, Nicole, and Claire, thank you so much for your help.